Sea creatures come in many shapes and sizes, but many of them are portrayed as cute companions of the sea, with the obvious exception of a shark, which is why you see many of them as video game and movie mascots over the years. And on the cuteness scale, sea otters are among the top tier of sea creatures. I mean, just look at this face. How could you say no to this face? Taking advantage of that fact, Wayward Distractions has created a puzzle platformer in Space Otter Charlie, which releases on March 18th, 2021 on the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, and the PC, specifically Steam, which is where the footage and gameplay was done for this review. It cost $14.99, but before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher, Quantum Astrophysics Guild, for the purposes of review, which, by the way, that's an awesome publisher name. Now, that won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So the story behind Space Otter Charlie is that the world is basically dying due to global warming, and while the humans got out of Dodge rather quickly, the animals, unfortunately, not so much. Man, humans are bastards at times. So the otters came together to try to figure out how to build a spaceship, find a place to live, and hopefully not die along the way. Surprisingly, they don't explode in the atmosphere. And honestly, the opening of this game is sort of hilarious, but still sets the loose plot together rather well of why you're doing what you're doing. The writing isn't something to entirely write home about here. It's on par with what you'd expect from more family-friendly humor, almost to a T. You do get a clever reference here and there, but you also get several groan-worthy jokes, especially with some of the characters you rescue later on. But really, it's not why you're playing this game, but it's an okay side activity. But the core of Space Otter Charlie is the gameplay. So, as I mentioned, your goal in the game is to find a place to settle with your otter brethren. Yep, showing off that dad humor that you can see in the game. To do that, you'll go through a series of levels to march you to your goal, whether it be finding a part you need for your ship, or just exploring a place to get a weapon that you can use to blast holes into things. You do have your main missions, but you do get a couple of side missions here and there to get extra parts or extra suits in order for you to get a little more powered up. Once you select a level, you'll control Charlie in a top-down shooter space environment in 0G. You can shoot in any direction to take out enemies, but the core movement involves your jetpack. You point a direction to move in and press A, or at least A on a Switch Pro controller, to use some fuel from your jetpack, which regenerates over time. Stopping, however, also uses fuel. You have to point your new direction in the opposite direction that you're going to start slowing yourself down. The game is momentum based, so you have to figure out exactly how much distance you need to travel and how fast you need to go before you run right into an enemy. You do have other tricks in your disposal, like sliding along the ground of a level, but in most cases that's a niche option and is used in very specific scenarios, because the overall movement in all directions of the jetpack is usually more useful 90% of the time. This combination of skills is used in the various puzzle platforming segments that you'll have to get across, and yes, it's a puzzle platformer before anything else, even if you have a gun in your hand. Enemies may get in your way here and can kill you, but the biggest threats you'll have to deal with is figuring out how to get through a certain area without getting hit in the face with a laser, or avoiding flamethrowers without becoming even more endangered than your species already is. So you may be asking, how are the puzzles? Well, it's a very mixed bag. I would say 40% of them are good, 40% are okay, 10% are bad, and 10% are annoying. Granted, none of these puzzles are going to make you sweat when it comes to thinking about the situation. It isn't that kind of game. But there are times where you're going to have to consider how something rotates in order to line up lasers, or getting the timing right so that you don't take too much damage. That's where the game shines, and really I found the game really hit its stride in the middle third of the game. I want to emphasize the fact that I believe the target audience for this game is a younger generation. Maybe not necessarily, toddlers or anything like that, but I'm talking, getting out of elementary school, middle school kind of area. And that's not to say that people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s won't enjoy this game. In fact, the puzzle platforming can be very fun at times. But if you're expecting a game to take you to the edge and the limit of your brain power, this is not the game. You'll have that moment of aha at times, but it's not going to stress you at all. Now, I'll openly admit, there were one or two puzzles that took me way too long to figure out, but sometimes the mechanics weren't entirely made clear or felt like there was a rule missing that I just couldn't see. Like with the platforms that flip when you touch them at first. Once in a while, I would seem to touch it and it wouldn't flip, and so it was leading to rules in my head like, wait, I'm missing something here. You can feel stupid while playing this game, but that's sort of the area of a puzzle platformer. Now, I mentioned a 10% bad, and those are the particular parts of the game that don't do a very good job of giving you information in order to understand what you need to do. In this section in particular, you have to avoid the walls because you will overheat, but you also seem to have some sort of temperature associated with the otter. I mean, yeah, that makes sense with the overheating. And you'll notice on the side of the screen that it's getting more hot, it's flames, and you think, oh, I need to cool down, and then you start to get more in the middle, and those start to go away. Okay, great, and then you take damage, because technically, you're still apparently gaining temperature, just at a slower rate. It wants you to go fast in this section, but that information that it gives you doesn't always indicate that. In fact, it sort of gives contradictory information. I love the fact that the game wanted precision out of me, and this section is fun, but I feel like its rules could have been a little bit more clear. Now, I did mention a 10% annoying, and this had everything to do with crate puzzles. Not necessarily the puzzles themselves, those were fine. It's just that some of the momentum you need in order to get them to go, it took a lot. You'd push against it, you'd shoot it, and it just sort of moved very slowly. And I get it, it's supposed to be a huge thing, and it's supposed to take a little bit more effort, but it just got boring trying to push it over and over and over again. I will say this to the devs. If you plan on doing more DLC or adding more levels in the future, take the reflector portion of your game where you shoot and it reflects off the surface and expand that. That was some of the best stuff in the game. Being able to, hit things off and reflect them over and over again and get through those little holes, those were pretty good, especially when you needed to kill things and hitting it off, 2 or 3 things and getting that damage on it. That really felt rewarding in not only the puzzle platforming, but the general combat. In particular, the one boss fight where the reflector really came into play, that was the best part of the game. Yeah, I know it wasn't necessarily the most puzzle platformy part of the game, but I was really entertained by that, and you really should expand that at some point. As for the presentation, I do like the overall coloring and design of the creatures and the enemies, and even the characters that you can unlock. And in most cases, I appreciate that the game did its best to try to keep with the themes of space and asteroids and whatnot. The presentation never gets in the way of gameplay. It's always easy to see Charlie and most of the projectiles and enemies, especially against the background and also the hazards. With that said, I get it. It's Space Otter Charlie. You're in space, and there's stars. Great, wonderful. That doesn't mean that 90% of the backgrounds need to be space themed and I need to see the stars all the time. Like maybe more of the interior of the ship that I'm looking at. I get why it's there, I do. It's there to show that you're in space, there's no gravity, that, that connection is made in your head. But when I'm playing the game for 4, 5, 6 hours, it just becomes hard to keep on looking at the background, especially when you don't exactly go too crazy on the color palette otherwise. Sound design and music is nothing to write about home either, but it does the job. The music isn't exactly going to win any awards, but sets the themes of space to a reasonable extent. And the sound gives you that feedback that you need when hitting switches and enemies, although I would have liked to hear more life from the enemies that you dealt with at times. Take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about. As for the amount of content you get here, I would say it takes you anywhere between 3.5 and 6 hours to beat the game. Granted, that's a big time frame, but stupid me unfortunately left the game on during one night, and thus my time in Steam is a little bit off. It does help that you do have extras such as the suits that you can collect and the characters that you can unlock for the end of the game. Nothing that you can play as, but sort of like, oh, you're bringing these people with you. So there is a little bit of extra content there, and I finished around a 94%, so I saw most of the game. Although I'm not exactly sure where that other 6% is. I mean, everything that I see on screen says 100%, and yet I'm at 94. Weird. Also, in terms of performance, I didn't see any issues. I played on both my laptop and my PC, and while I didn't, calculate any frame rates, I didn't see any frame drops or any, stuttering of any sort, and the game didn't seem to have any problems with resolution or anything like that. The options are a little lacking, unfortunately. Yeah, it's great that I could change the music and everything, but the fact that I can't lower the sound in terms of the music versus the sound, I wasn't appreciating that. But one thing I think I have to bring up is the fact that there are no bindable keys. And for a PC release, that seems like a big oversight. I played with a controller, don't get me wrong, but even with the controller, some people are going to want to bind keys, and it seems like it's a necessity, especially for a platformer like this. The fact is that you almost want the ability to change a little bit of the sensitivity, so not having any controls on that, yeah, that seems like a big miss on that part. Finally, many of you may point out that I talked about the platforming, I talked about shooting things, but didn't really go into the combat. The fact is that they're enemies and you have to kill them. And I felt like they were more transitional segments from one place to another in terms of the puzzles. Yeah, you get different weaponry, you get rocket launchers, you do get special weapons when you get the suits, but they all serve the point of getting rid of enemies. The enemies are rather basic here, and really, part of me wonders if the game would have been better served at times if it didn't have enemies at all. I don't think that is entirely the case, especially with the reflector ray, but I feel like the combat, when people see some of the segments and some of the gameplay, that it may overshadow the puzzles, and hence why I'm talking to you about the combat now. It's serviceable. You hit things, it does damage, there are some reasonable patterns, and dealing with the movement, yeah, it works. It's just not anything that great, and if you really want combat, this is not the game for you. There are plenty of top-down shooters that work for you, but this is more about making your mind work. In the end, Space Otter Charlie is a fun experience that won't necessarily rock your world or fully challenge you in the puzzle platforming genre, but works as a good zero-gravity experience to play here and there, and to challenge your mind to how to solve its puzzles. While I did want the game to take its mechanics up to the next level at times, and yes, there were some frustrating elements, I feel like the game is great to play with a younger audience, like if you, say, have a kid. And the cute presentation and humor will definitely make some of you laugh, while others will groan. It's solid, but nothing that will draw people outside the genre to want to play it. And that's why it's getting a 74 out of 100, making it a niche buy for those who love the genre, but a sale buy for most others. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which attempts to match the more subjective elements of games to you. If you fall strongly into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that enhancer score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see where the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Honestly, this is a game for younger audiences in my opinion, but it's also a good relaxing game that doesn't push you to the brink. But those wanting challenge, yeah, I can understand why you would skip this one. Anyway, that's it for this review, and if you want to leave feedback, I would appreciate it in the comments section below. What kind of games you want to see on this channel in terms of reviews, and in particular, how I can make these reviews better for you all. And if you want to see more indie game content like this, go over on Twitch and, follow Dragnix mod. That's my Twitch, where I usually play 2 to 3 games a week. Usually it's one that I continue on. I think I'm playing Everhood right now, but I usually take 2 games that are coming out in the week and take a look at them. Yeah, I don't do a video on them, but sometimes you just need to get more content out there. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out. The next review will be Clea 2. See you later.